June 22, 1633. The hall of the Dominican convent of Santa Maria sopra Minerva, Rome. 69-year-old Galileo Galilei kneels before 10 cardinal inquisitors, his weathered hands trembling as he prepares to recant the scientific truths that have defined his life's work. The man who first turned a telescope skyward to reveal the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the mountainous surface of our own satellite, now faces a choice between death and denying the evidence of his own observations. As he speaks the words that will save his life but shatter his spirit, "I abjure, curse, and detest the aforesaid errors and heresies regarding the Earth's motion around the sun." Galileo carries within his bloodline the genetic legacy of Tuscan cloth merchants, Florentine musicians, and Renaissance intellectuals whose traditions of innovation, artistic excellence, and mathematical precision have prepared his family for this moment of scientific revolution and religious persecution. The intellectual courage that would drive Galileo to challenge 2 millennia of astronomical orthodoxy flows from a bloodline rooted in the commercial and cultural sophistication of Renaissance Italy, where his ancestors had spent centuries navigating the complex worlds of international trade, musical composition, and mathematical calculation. The Galilei family name itself reflects their origins in the hills of Tuscany, where their forebears had established themselves as members of the emerging merchant class that would transform medieval Europe into the birthplace of the modern world. The Galilei lineage can be traced back to the early 14th century through records preserved in the archives of Florence and Pisa, where the family first appears as participants in the wool trade that connected Italian cities with markets throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. The earliest documented ancestor, Galileo di Bonaiuto, lived in the village of Santa Maria a Monte, near Pisa, around 1310, working as a small merchant who transported woolen goods between rural producers and urban markets. Galileo di Bonaiuto's commercial activities required literacy, numeracy, and familiarity with foreign currencies that distinguished him from the agricultural laborers who comprised the majority of medieval society. His account books, fragments of which survive in Florentine archives, reveal a man capable of complex calculations involving weights, measures, currencies, and interest rates, demonstrating the mathematical skills that would later flourish in his famous descendant. The commercial success achieved by Galileo di Bonaiuto enabled him to marry above his social station when he wed Montefiore di Bostici in 1325, connecting the Galilei family to a lineage of minor nobility that had been established in Tuscany since the 11th century. The Bostici family, though not among the great Florentine dynasties, possessed landholdings, urban properties, and political connections that enhanced the Galilei family's social position and economic opportunities. Galileo di Bonaiuto and Montefiore, son Tommaso Galilei, born on September 14, 1328, expanded the family's commercial operations beyond local wool trading into the more lucrative international markets that connected Italian merchants with Flemish manufacturers, English wool producers, and Eastern Mediterranean suppliers. Tommaso's business activities required him to travel extensively throughout Europe, exposing him to different languages, currencies, and commercial practices that broadened his intellectual horizons. Tommaso's marriage to Giovanna Ammannati in 1356 brought the Galilei family into contact with one of Florence's established merchant dynasty. The Ammannati family had been involved in banking and international trade since the 13th century, maintaining business relationships with the Medici, Pazzi, and other great Florentine houses. Giovanna's dowry included not only money and property, but also commercial connections that provided Tommaso with access to more sophisticated financial instruments and larger-scale trading opportunities. The partnership between Tommaso and Giovanna's families reflected the complex commercial alliances that characterized Renaissance Italian business, where marriage served not only personal and social function cooperation. Their union produced 5 children, including Michel Galilei, born on December 2, 1359, who would continue the family's commercial expansion while also developing interests in music and mathematics. Michel Galilei's generation witnessed the transformation of Italian commerce from medieval guild-based production to Renaissance capitalism, as new financial instruments, improved transportation, and expanded markets created unprecedented opportunities for ambitious merchants. Michel adapted to these changes by diversifying the family's operations beyond textile trading into banking, real estate, and money-changing activities that required increasingly sophisticated mathematical and legal knowledge. Michel's marriage to Caterina Bardi in 1385 connected the Galilei family to one of Florence's ancient banking houses, whose operations extended from London to Constantinople and whose financial innovations had helped create the economic foundations of Renaissance culture. Caterina brought to the marriage not only substantial wealth, but also knowledge of advanced accounting methods, foreign exchange operations, and investment strategies that enhanced the Galilei family's commercial sophistication. The Bardi family's international connections exposed Michel to scientific and mathematical knowledge from across Europe and the Islamic world, as their commercial correspondence often included information about new technologies, navigational techniques, and astronomical observations that were useful for merchants conducting business across vast distances. This exposure to international intellectual developments created an environment of curiosity and innovation that would profoundly influence future generations of the Galilei family. Michel and Caterina's son, Niccolò Galilei, born on August 17, 1388, represented the fourth generation of Galilei commercial success and the beginning of the family's transition from pure commerce into intellectual and artistic pursuits. Niccolò received an education that included not only practical commercial skills, but also classical literature, mathematics, and music that prepared him for participation in the humanistic culture of the early Renaissance. Niccolò's involvement in the cultural life of Florence during the early 15th century exposed him to the intellectual revolution that was transforming European thought through the rediscovery of classical texts, the development of humanistic education, and the patronage of arts and sciences by wealthy merchants and political leaders. His participation in literary societies, musical academies, and mathematical discussions reflected the broader transformation of commercial wealth into cultural achievement that characterized Renaissance society. The marriage of Niccolò to Maddalena dei Benci in 1415 connected the Galilei family to one of Florence's most cultured merchant dynasties, whose patronage of artists and scholars had helped establish the intellectual foundations of Renaissance humanism. Maddalena's father, Antonio dei Benci, was a patron of early humanist scholars and maintained a library that included Greek and Latin classics, contemporary philosophical works, and mathematical treatises that provided intellectual resources for the growing Galilei family. Niccolò and Maddalena's household became a center of cultural activity that attracted musicians, mathematicians, and natural philosophers who shared knowledge about the latest developments in art, science, and technology. Their salon-like gatherings created an intellectual environment that emphasized curiosity, experimentation, and critical thinking, establishing family traditions that would profoundly influence their descendants' approach to learning and discovery. Their son, Giuliano Galilei, born on June 3, 1422, inherited not only substantial commercial wealth, but also the cultural sophistication and intellectual curiosity that had been developing within the family for several generations. Giuliano's education emphasized mathematics, music, and natural philosophy, in addition to the commercial skills necessary for managing the family's business operations, reflecting the Renaissance ideal of the complete man who combined practical competence with cultural achievement. Giuliano's marriage to Lucrezia Landucci in 1448 brought additional commercial connections while also introducing musical traditions that would become central to the Galilei family identity. The Landucci family included several accomplished musicians who had performed for the Medici court and maintained connections with the musical establishments of other Italian cities. Lucrezia herself was an accomplished lutenist whose musical knowledge would influence her children's education and career choices. The mid-15th century prosperity achieved by Giuliano Galilei enabled him to invest in education, property, and cultural activities that positioned the family among Florence's educated elite while maintaining their commercial foundation. His business operations had evolved from simple trading into complex financial activities that included banking, real estate investment, and industrial partnerships that required sophisticated legal and mathematical knowledge. Giuliano and Lucrezia's son, Michelangelo Galilei, born on November 18, 1455, represented a new direction for the family as he chose to emphasize musical and mathematical pursuits over commercial activities. Michelangelo's decision to become a professional musician reflected both the cultural sophistication that his family had achieved and the increasing opportunities for artistic careers that characterized Renaissance society. Michelangelo's musical education included not only practical performance skills, but also theoretical knowledge of mathematical relationships in music, acoustics, and instrument construction that connected musical practice with natural philosophy. His understanding of mathematical principles in music provided intellectual foundations that would later influence his famous son's approach to experimental science and mathematical analysis. The marriage of Michelangelo to Giulia Ammannati in 1482 reconnected the Galilei family to their earlier commercial associations, while also bringing additional musical traditions that enriched the family's cultural heritage. Giulia's family had maintained interests in both commerce and music for several generations, creating a household environment that valued both practical achievement and artistic excellence. Michelangelo's career as a court musician and music theorist took the family to various Italian cities, including Pisa, where he eventually established a permanent residence and began the family's long association with that city's university and cultural institutions. His work as a music teacher, composer, and theorist provided the family with intellectual respectability, while also maintaining connections to the commercial and political networks that had been sources of Galilei's prosperity for over a century. His rapid mastery of geometric proofs and his ability to apply mathematical reasoning to physical problems demonstrated the intellectual capabilities that would enable his revolutionary discoveries. The financial difficulties that forced Galileo to leave the University of Pisa in 1585 without completing his degree created challenges that also provided opportunities for independent study and practical experimentation. His return to Florence allowed him to continue his mathematical education through private study, while also beginning the experimental investigations that would establish his scientific reputation. Galileo's early investigations of pendulum motion, begun around 1586, demonstrated his ability to combine careful observation with mathematical analysis to discover natural laws that had escaped previous investigators. His recognition that the pendulum period depends on length rather than amplitude represented his first significant scientific discovery and established his approach to experimental natural philosophy. The invention of the hydrostatic balance around 1586 provided Galileo with his first practical demonstration of the commercial applications of scientific knowledge, while also establishing his reputation as an innovative mechanic, capable of creating useful instruments. The device's success in determining the composition of metal alloys demonstrated how mathematical principles could be applied to solve practical problems. Galileo's appointment as mathematics lecturer at the University of Pisa in 1589 marked the beginning of his professional academic career and provided him with the financial security and intellectual freedom necessary for pursuing advanced scientific research. His lectures on Euclidean geometry and practical mathematics attracted students while also providing opportunities for discussing his developing ideas about motion and mechanics. The experiments with falling bodies that Galileo conducted during his time at Pisa challenged Aristotelian physics and demonstrated his willingness to test traditional authorities against empirical evidence. His discovery that objects of different weights fall at the same rate contradicted nearly 2,000 years of accepted wisdom and established his reputation as a revolutionary thinker. Galileo's transfer to the University of Padua in 1592 provided him with a more liberal intellectual environment and a higher salary that enabled him to pursue advanced research, while also supporting his family and his experimental activities. Padua's association with the Venetian Republic created an atmosphere of intellectual tolerance that encouraged innovative thinking and protected scholars from religious persecution. The 18 years that Galileo spent at Padua, 1592–1610, represented the most productive period of his career, as he developed the foundations of modern physics, while also creating the telescopic observations that would revolutionize astronomy. His investigations of motion mechanics and astronomical phenomena during this period established him as one of Europe's leading natural philosophers. Galileo's relationship with Marina Gamba, begun around 1600, provided him with companionship and family life, while also creating responsibilities that motivated his search for financial security through practical applications of his scientific knowledge. Their three children, Virginia born 1600, Livia born 1601, and Vincenzo born 1606, became important factors in his personal and professional decisions. The invention of the geometric and military compass around 1597 demonstrated Galileo's ability to combine theoretical knowledge with practical applications that appealed to military engineers, surveyors, and merchants. The instrument's success provided him with additional income, while also establishing his reputation as an inventor capable of creating useful mathematical devices. Galileo's letter to Benedetto Caselli in 1613 and his expanded letter to the Grand Duchess Christina in 1615 outlined his position on the relationship between scientific knowledge and biblical interpretation, arguing that Scripture should be interpreted metaphorically when it conflicts with demonstrated natural truths. These theological arguments placed him in direct conflict with conservative religious authorities. The investigation of Galileo by the Roman Inquisition in 1615–1616 resulted in the condemnation of Copernican astronomy as foolish and absurd, in philosophy and formally heretical, and the warning that Galileo should not defend or teach heliocentric doctrine. This prohibition created tensions between his scientific convictions and his religious obligations that would dominate the rest of his career. Galileo's apparent compliance with the 1616 prohibition enabled him to continue his scientific work while avoiding confrontation with religious authorities, but it also required him to exercise extreme caution in discussing astronomical questions that related to cosmic structure. His research during this period focused on mechanics, hydrostatics, and other areas that seemed less theologically problematic. The publication of Il Saggiatore v. Assayer in 1623 established Galileo's position on scientific methodology and his commitment to mathematical analysis of natural phenomena. His famous assertion that the book of nature is written in mathematical characters articulated the philosophical foundation for mathematical physics and experimental science. The election of Maffei Barberini as Pope Urban VIII in 1623 created new opportunities for Galileo's astronomical work, as the new pope had previously supported his research and seemed more sympathetic to scientific innovation than his predecessor. However, Urban's support proved limited when Galileo's astronomical arguments challenged fundamental religious doctrines. Galileo's work on dialogue concerning the two chief world systems during the 1620s represented his attempt to present Copernican and Ptolemaic astronomy in a balanced manner, while actually demonstrating the superiority of heliocentric theory. The book's structure as a conversation among three characters enabled him to present controversial ideas while maintaining the fiction of impartial discussion. The publication of the dialogue in 1632 created an immediate sensation throughout Europe, while also provoking the anger of Pope Urban VIII, who felt that Galileo had violated their understanding about the proper treatment of cosmological questions. The book's obvious bias toward Copernican theory and its apparent ridicule of papal positions triggered the investigation that led to Galileo's trial. The trial of Galileo before the Roman Inquisition in 1633 became one of history's most famous conflicts between science and religion, as the astronomer was forced to choose between defending his scientific convictions and avoiding imprisonment or death. His decision to recant his support for Copernican astronomy saved his life, but created a martyrdom myth that has influenced the relationship between science and religion for centuries. Galileo's house arrest at his villa in Arcetri, following his condemnation, enabled him to continue scientific work while preventing him from teaching or publishing on astronomical subjects. His isolation provided opportunities for completing his work on mechanics, while also maintaining correspondence with scientists throughout Europe who continued to develop his ideas. The completion of two new sciences during the 1630s represented Galileo's most important contribution to physics, as he systematically analyzed the mathematical principles governing motion, strength of materials, and mechanical phenomena. The book's publication in Protestant Netherlands in 1638 ensured its circulation despite Catholic prohibition, while establishing the foundation for modern mathematical physics. Galileo's blindness during his final years prevented him from continuing observational astronomy, but enabled him to focus on mechanical investigations that required mathematical analysis rather than visual observation. His continued productivity despite physical limitations demonstrated the intellectual vigor that had characterized his entire career. The death of Galileo on January 8, 1642, marked the end of a career that had revolutionized human understanding of the cosmos, while also creating lasting conflicts about the relationship between scientific discovery and religious authority. His funeral was deliberately modest to avoid creating a martyr's shrine, but his scientific legacy could not be suppressed. The immediate aftermath of Galileo's death was characterized by efforts to preserve and disseminate his scientific work, while avoiding confrontation with religious authorities who continued to prohibit Copernican astronomy. His students and correspondents worked to maintain his research traditions, while adapting his methods to new areas of investigation. The influence of Galileo's work on the development of modern science extended far beyond his specific discoveries to encompass his methodology, his mathematical approach to natural phenomena, and his demonstration that careful observation could reveal truths that contradicted traditional authorities. His example inspired subsequent generations of scientists to pursue empirical investigation, despite institutional resistance. The rehabilitation of Galileo's astronomical work occurred gradually, as the evidence for heliocentric cosmology became overwhelming, and as religious authorities adapted their positions to accommodate scientific discoveries. The removal of his works from the Index of Prohibited Books in 1835 marked the official recognition that his scientific conclusions had been correct. The cultural legacy of Galileo in the development of modern scientific methodology reflects both his specific contributions to astronomy and physics and his broader influence on the relationship between observation, mathematical analysis, and theoretical understanding. His integration of experimentation with mathematical reasoning provided a model for scientific investigation that continues to guide contemporary research. The technological applications of Galileo's discoveries contributed to improvements in navigation, timekeeping, engineering, and optical instruments that supported economic development and military innovation. His work on mechanics influenced the development of machinery and construction techniques, while his astronomical observations improved calendar reform and navigation methods. The international character of Galileo's scientific correspondence demonstrated the emergence of a European scientific community that transcended national and religious boundaries while sharing common methods and standards for investigating natural phenomena. His exchanges with scientists throughout Europe helped establish the collaborative traditions that characterize modern scientific research. The pedagogical influence of Galileo's approach to scientific education emphasized the importance of direct observation, mathematical analysis, and critical thinking in understanding natural phenomena. His teaching methods influenced the development of scientific curricula and laboratory instruction that continue to shape contemporary science education. The philosophical implications of Galileo's work for understanding the relationship between human knowledge and natural reality contributed to broader intellectual developments during the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. His demonstration that mathematical analysis could reveal hidden truths about natural phenomena influenced philosophical debates about the nature of knowledge and the relationship between theory and observation. The biographical tradition surrounding Galileo has emphasized both his scientific achievements and his conflicts with religious authority, creating a historical image that combines intellectual heroism with personal suffering and institutional persecution. This tradition has influenced popular understanding of the relationship between science and religion, while also contributing to ongoing debates about academic freedom and intellectual independence. The preservation of Galileo's instruments, manuscripts, and personal effects in various museums and libraries provides contemporary scholars with detailed evidence about his working methods, his technical innovations, and his intellectual development. These materials continue to yield new insights about the process of scientific discovery and the relationship between theoretical understanding and practical application. The genealogical legacy of Galileo Galilei, tracing back through centuries of Tuscan merchants, musicians, and intellectuals, illustrates the complex relationship between family tradition, educational opportunity, and exceptional achievement in Renaissance Italy. His lineage's gradual transition from commercial success to cultural sophistication created the conditions that enabled his revolutionary contributions to science, while also providing the intellectual foundations that supported his methodological innovations. The transformation of the Galilei family from medieval cloth merchants to producers of one of history's greatest scientists demonstrates the importance of accumulated cultural capital, educational investment, and intellectual tradition in fostering scientific innovation. The patient development of mathematical skills, empirical methods, and critical thinking across multiple generations created the environment that enabled Galileo's discoveries and established his lasting influence on human understanding of the natural world. The story of Galileo's bloodline, stretching from the commercial networks of medieval Tuscany to the intellectual heights of Renaissance natural philosophy, illustrates both the continuities and transformations that characterized early modern European society. His achievement represented not only individual genius, but also the culmination of centuries of family investment in education, practical knowledge, and cultural sophistication that reflects the broader social and intellectual changes of his remarkable era.